Get down if you want to live. The shout tore through the midnight rain before anyone understood where it came from. Cups rattled on saucers. A neon sign buzzed over Brielle Carter's little corner cafe on Maple Street. Then an old man stumbled out of the alley and collapsed beside the outdoor tables, one hand pressed to his chest, the other clutching something under his coat. For half a second, the whole street froze. A delivery driver ducked behind his van. Two college kids dropped their phones and ran. Someone inside whispered, "Call 911." But fear moves faster than courage, and nobody stepped forward. Nobody except Brielle. She had been wiping down the pastry case after a 14-hour shift, feet aching inside discount sneakers, apron stained with espresso and cinnamon. She was 26, behind on rent, and one late paycheck away from losing the apartment she shared with her younger brother. She had every reason to protect herself first. Instead, she pushed through the door and ran straight into the storm. Rain slapped her face like cold hands. The old man looked up at her with eyes too sharp for someone so weak. "Please," he said, barely above the thunder. "Don't let them find me." Then headlights swept across the street. A black sedan rolled past the intersection, slow and silent, like it already knew exactly where to stop. Brielle didn't think. She dropped to her knees and threw herself over the stranger, shielding him with her own body as the cafe windows cracked from the force of something striking nearby. Glass chimed onto the sidewalk. Customers screamed. Somewhere down the block, tires spun hard against wet pavement. Then just as quickly as it began, the sedan vanished into the dark. Brielle stayed there, trembling, one hand on the old man's shoulder, the other braced against the pavement. She could feel his breathing. Shallow, but steady. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked. He opened his eyes again, studying her face as if trying to understand why she was still there. "Why would you help me?" he asked. Brielle swallowed rainwater and fear at the same time. Because no one else did. The answer seemed to hit him harder than the storm. She helped him sit up. And that was when she felt it, a heavy ring beneath his sleeve, cold against her fingers. Not costume jewelry. Not ordinary. A black stone set in silver, engraved with a crest she didn't recognize and numbers carved so precisely they looked important. The old man noticed her glance and quietly covered it. Sirens wailed in the distance now. Neighbors cracked open doors. Curtains shifted. The world was becoming brave again now that danger had passed. Brielle guided him inside the cafe and sat him in the booth by the front window. Under the warm lights, he looked less like a homeless drifter and more like someone pretending to be one. His coat was old, but tailored. His shoes were worn, but handmade. Even the way he held silence felt expensive. She handed him a towel and a cup of hot tea. "You should wait for the police," she said. He gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "No. They won't help with this." He rose slowly, steadier than before, and walked to the door. Rain curled around him in silver sheets. Before stepping back into the night, he turned once more. "Miss Carter," he said, reading her name tag without looking down, "you may have changed more than one life tonight." Then he disappeared into the storm, leaving Brielle alone in the shattered cafe, staring at the door, wondering how a stranger knew her name. By morning, Maple Street looked like it always did. Delivery trucks double-parked at the curb. A jogger with a golden retriever paused at the crosswalk. The bakery next door rolled out trays of warm croissants, and the city pretended nothing unusual had happened. That is what cities do. They swallow strange nights and serve ordinary mornings. Brielle unlocked the cafe at 6 sharp, swept broken glass from the entrance, and taped cardboard over the cracked window until the repair crew could come. She had slept less than 2 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the old man stepping into the rain and heard him say her name like he had known it for years. "Miss Carter." Not Miss. Not Waitress. Carter. Precise. Intentional. She tied on a clean apron, started the espresso machine, and focused on what she could control. Steam hissed. Milk frothed. Receipts printed. At 7:15, her brother Jonah called from campus. Did you really dive into the street for some stranger? News travels fast when neighbors have cameras. Brielle smiled despite herself. I did not dive. I ran. There is a difference. Jonah laughed, then lowered his voice. Rent is due Friday. Do not forget. As if she could. The landlord had already taped one warning to their door. Her phone buzzed again with 3 missed calls from an unknown number. She ignored them. Money problems were loud enough without mystery joining the conversation. By 8 o'clock the cafe was full. Nurses grabbing coffee before shift change. Construction workers ordering egg sandwiches. A woman in pearls asking if the cardboard over the window hurt the brand image. Brielle moved through it all with the calm speed of someone who had no luxury to fall apart. Then the room changed. It happened first in the reflection of the pastry case. 4 black SUVs turned onto Maple Street and stopped nose to tail outside the cafe. Engines idled. Doors opened in perfect sequence. 4 men in dark suits stepped onto the sidewalk, broad-shouldered, earpieces hidden, eyes scanning rooftops and alleys like the block had suddenly become important. Conversations died mid-sentence. A spoon clinked against ceramic and nobody picked it up. Mrs. Delgado from the flower shop next door crossed herself. One customer whispered, "Federal agents." Another whispered, "Mafia." Brielle felt every eye in the room turn toward her, as if trouble always knows where the working girl lives. The tallest guard entered first. He did not bark orders or flash a badge. He simply looked around the cafe, then nodded once. Clear. The other 3 took positions by the door and windows. Her manager, Denise, appeared from the kitchen pale as cream cheese frosting. Brielle, what did you do? Before she could answer, the final SUV door opened. The old man stepped out slowly, but there was nothing fragile about him now. Gone was the soaked coat and shaking hands. He wore a charcoal suit cut so sharply it looked expensive from across the street. Silver hair combed back. Polished shoes. A watch that could pay her rent for years. People outside lifted phones. People inside forgot their coffee. He entered the cafe and the guard straightened without being told. Power does not need an introduction. It announces itself in silence. The old man walked straight to Brielle. For one terrifying second, she thought she had made some terrible mistake helping him. Then he smiled. Warm. Real. "Miss Carter," he said, the room hanging on every word, "thank you for saving my life. My name is Edward Whitmore. And I believe this cafe is too small for what happens next." No one moved. Not the nurses. Not the men in work boots. Not even Denise, who usually had an opinion before anyone finished a sentence. The entire cafe stood still as Edward Whitmore removed one glove finger by finger and looked around the room like he was measuring it for history. Then he turned back to Brielle. "Last night," he said, "several people watched me fall. Several more watched danger drive straight toward me. You were the only one who stepped forward." His voice was calm, but calm can carry farther than shouting ever will. A woman near the register slowly lowered her phone. A teenager by the window stopped recording altogether. Shame has a sound. It is silence with eyes attached. Brielle wiped her hands on her apron. "Sir, I just did what anyone should do." A faint smile touched his face. "No, Miss Carter. You did what almost no one does." He reached inside his coat and placed a folder on the nearest table. Thick cream paper. Her name printed across the front. Denise nearly stopped breathing. Brielle stared at it as if opening it might trigger something she could not afford. What is this? She asked. A beginning, Edward said. He nodded once toward one of the guards, who stepped forward carrying a small velvet box. Inside sat the black stone ring she had felt beneath his sleeve in the rain. In daylight it looked even stranger, carved with a crest of an oak tree crossed by 4 stars. My family built Whitmore Capital 3 generations ago, Edward said. Real estate, shipping, energy, and more mistakes than I care to list. That ring has been worn by every person who led the company. Last night I wore an old coat so I could walk this city. Without being announced before I arrived. Instead, I was reminded what wealth cannot buy. Brielle glanced at the cracked window, the cardboard, the line of waiting customers who had forgotten why they came. If this is about a reward, she said quietly, you do not owe me anything. The room leaned in. People love money stories, especially when the money belongs to someone else. Edward surprised them all by shaking his head. If I hand you cash, it disappears into bills, rent, and emergencies. Necessary things. Important things. But still temporary. He slid the folder closer. If I hand you opportunity, it can feed you for years. Brielle opened it with careful fingers. The first page showed the deed to the building. The second page showed renovation plans. New windows. New kitchen equipment. Expanded seating. Community event space upstairs. The third page carried a title that made her blink twice. Managing Partner, Brielle Carter. Her knees nearly forgot their job. Denise grabbed the counter to steady herself. This cannot be real, Brielle whispered. It becomes real when you sign, Edward replied. Gasps rolled through the room like wind through leaves. Mrs. Delgado cried openly into a bouquet of daisies. Jonah burst through the door at that exact moment, backpack half-zipped, breathless from running 6 blocks. Brielle. Are you okay? He stopped cold when he saw the guards. Then he saw the folder. Then he saw his sister's face. Edward studied him. Your brother. Brielle nodded. Jonah Carter, sophomore at City College. Engineering major, Brielle answered before Jonah could. Tuition balance overdue by $6,400, Edward said, as if reading weather. Jonah blinked. How do you know that? Because when I thank someone, I do my homework. Another guard placed a second envelope on the table. Paid in full. Next semester included. Brielle covered her mouth. Jonah sat down without asking permission. Tears gathered in Denise's eyes, but Edward was no longer smiling. He looked toward the street beyond the glass. Gratitude is only the first reason I came, he said. Then his gaze hardened into something older and sharper than wealth. The second reason is this. The men from last night know where to find me now. And if they watched closely, they know where to find you too. The room lost its warmth in an instant. A second earlier, strangers had been smiling at miracles and whispering about luck. Now every face in the cafe carried the same question. If danger followed a billionaire, what would it do to a waitress with no gate, no driver, no walls higher than a storefront window? Jonah stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Brielle is not involved in whatever this is, he said, voice sharper than fear expected. She helped a man in trouble. That is all. Edward looked at him with the kind of respect powerful men rarely give freely. Young man, kindness often becomes involved the moment it is seen. One of the guards touched his earpiece and stepped toward the window. A dark sedan had slowed at the corner, then kept moving. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. But sometimes the smallest signs carry the heaviest meaning. Brielle felt her heartbeat in her throat. I do not want guards, she said. I do not want trouble. I want to make coffee, pay rent, and get my brother through school. A few customers nodded. Ordinary dreams are the most expensive kind because they are bought with daily effort. Edward softened. Miss Carter, I know exactly what you want. That is why I am trying to protect it. He motioned for everyone to sit. Nobody did. Then he spoke quietly enough that the room had to earn each word. Last night was not random. I was meeting someone who wanted access to my company through pressure instead of principle. When I refused, they chose a louder method. They failed. Because you were there. Brielle glanced at the cardboard over the broken glass. Me? I am a waitress. Edward shook his head. No. You are the witness they did not plan for. You are the variable money could not predict. Denise finally found her voice. Should we call the police? We already did, one guard answered. They are aware. It was a careful sentence, and careful sentences usually hide larger truths. Brielle understood enough to know this problem lived above local pay grades. Edward turned the folder toward her again. I cannot force your decision. Sign or do. Not sign. Accept help or refuse it. But until this passes, my team stays nearby. Jonah crossed his arms. Nearby means what exactly? It means one vehicle outside, one rotating detail on the block, cameras installed today, and rides home if requested, said another guard with surprising gentleness. We are here to prevent inconvenience, not create it. Mrs. Delgado sniffed and pointed a flower stem at them. Then buy coffee if you are staying. Laughter broke the tension for one precious second. Even Edward smiled. Then Brielle noticed something on the sidewalk. Tucked beneath the front table leg, half hidden from the street, was a white envelope that had not been there 10 minutes ago. No stamp. No name. Just one black line drawn across the front. She stepped toward it, but the nearest guard moved faster and lifted a hand. Please do not touch that, ma'am. He slid it onto the counter with a napkin and opened it carefully. Inside was a single card. No message. No signature. Only 4 printed words. We saw everything tonight. The cafe inhaled as one. Jonah moved closer to his sister. Denise whispered a prayer to nobody specific. Edward read the card once, then folded it in half like it offended him personally. Good, he said. That saves us time. Brielle stared at him. Saves us time for what? He met her eyes, steady as stone. For ending this before they mistake your kindness for weakness. Then outside, from somewhere beyond the line of black SUVs, came the low growl of another engine pulling up to the curb. Every head turned toward the door. The engine outside idled low and patient, the kind of sound that did not ask permission to be heard. One of Edward Whitmore's guards stepped to the window and narrowed his eyes. Not one of ours, he said. That sentence landed heavier than any shout. Brielle felt Jonah move beside her, protective in the clumsy way younger brothers become men overnight. Denise gripped a coffee pot like it was a family heirloom. Even the regulars who had nowhere else to be suddenly remembered appointments. The front door opened before anyone reached it. A woman in a navy coat entered alone, heels quiet against the tile, umbrella folded with military precision. Mid-40s, silver streak in her hair, expression sharp enough to cut glass. She carried no handbag, no smile, no wasted motion. Behind her, the street held its breath. I am looking for Edward Whitmore, she said. Her voice was polished steel. One guard moved forward instantly. Name. She did not even glance at him. Helena Cross. Tell him I came personally, which means he should be worried. Edward exhaled through his nose as if recognizing a storm by scent alone. Let her through. The guards exchanged looks but obeyed. Helena approached the counter and placed a leather folder beside Brielle's untouched deed papers. She looked at Brielle first, not Edward. So you are the woman who disrupted a very expensive evening. Brielle straightened. I helped someone in trouble. Helena gave a thin smile. Yes. That is the inconvenient version of the story. Edward's tone cooled. Say what you came to say. Helena turned to the room as if she had just noticed the audience. Most people mistake money for power. Money buys comfort. Power decides who gets interrupted. Then she opened the folder. Inside were glossy renderings of Maple Street transformed beyond recognition. New towers. Retail chains. Luxury residences. The little cafe replaced by a marble lobby and valet lane. Denise gasped so loudly it echoed. Jonah stepped closer to the papers. What is this? Progress, Helena said. This entire block is under contract. Every lease. Every storefront. Every building except this one, because your brave waitress became interesting at the worst possible time. Brielle stared at the image where her cafe had been erased cleanly, as if years of early mornings and burnt fingertips could be deleted with software. You cannot just erase people, she said. Helena finally smiled with real amusement. That is almost always how it happens. Edward's hand came down flat on the counter. Enough. Helena did not flinch. Your board already knows the offer. Sign the merger by midnight and Maple Street survives untouched. Refuse, and redevelopment begins with the places that cannot afford lawyers. She slid one final page across the counter. A purchase agreement with numbers so large the room forgot how to blink. Brielle understood then. Last night had never been only about one old man in the rain. It was about leverage. Neighborhoods. Lives measured in decimal points. Why show me this? She asked. Because, Helena said, now he has to choose while looking at the face of the person who saved him. The cafe went silent enough to hear the espresso machine click off. Edward looked at the papers, then at Brielle, then at the cracked window patched with cardboard. A billionaire. A waitress. A block full of ordinary people who did not know their future had been scheduled between breakfast and lunch. Jonah whispered, Brielle, what does she mean by midnight? But Brielle was staring at Helena's folder. Tucked inside the back sleeve was the same black crest ring symbol she had seen the night before, except this one had been crossed out in red ink. Family, she realized, does not always mean loyalty. Edward met Helena's gaze. You should not have come here. Helena picked up her umbrella. No, Edward. You should not have brought your conscience here. She turned for the door, then paused without looking back. Midnight, she said. After that, this block belongs to whoever can afford it. The door closed behind Helena Cross, but her words stayed in the room like smoke. Midnight. A single word, 12 letters of pressure. People who had come for coffee now stood inside a battle they could not afford. Denise was first to speak. They cannot do this, right? There are permits, hearings, something. One of Edward's guards answered gently. They can do many things before anyone realizes it is happening. That is how people lose neighborhoods while reading the news. Jonah paced beside the pastry case, hands in his hair. So what now? We just wait for some billionaire family feud to decide if we get to live here. Brielle watched Edward more than she listened. He had not touched the merger papers. He had not defended himself. He simply stared at the rendering of Maple Street erased and rebuilt for strangers. Regret changes a face in small ways first. The jaw tightens. The eyes stop looking outward and start looking backward. You knew this was coming, she said quietly. Edward did not deny it. I knew. Helena wanted the block. I did not know she would use it this way. Brielle folded her arms. That sounds expensive, but not honest. A few customers looked down into their cups. Truth from the powerless often makes everyone uncomfortable. Edward nodded once, accepting the hit. Fair. Then he surprised them all by removing his suit jacket and laying it across a chair like any tired man finishing a shift. 30 years ago, he said, this neighborhood gave me my first chance. My father loaned me nothing. My name opened no doors then. I unloaded trucks 3 streets over and borrowed books from the library on 5th. I promised myself that if I ever built something, I would not become the kind of man who forgets where he started. He glanced at the glossy redevelopment images. Somewhere along the way, I got busy. Denise softened first. Hard to stay human at the top, I guess. Harder than it should be, Edward replied. He pushed the merger papers aside and turned to Brielle. Miss Carter, Helena believes this block is leverage because she assumes everyone here is alone. She is wrong. Brielle almost laughed. With respect, sir, people like us are usually very alone. Not today, Edward said. He stood and addressed the room, not as an owner, but as a man asking to be measured. Anyone whose rent rises because of this fight, I will cover 6 months. Any small business here facing legal notices, my attorneys begin today. Any employee who loses hours while we secure the block, payroll continues. The cafe erupted in overlapping voices. Shock. Relief. Suspicion. Hope. Hope always arrives carefully when it has been disappointed before. Jonah narrowed his eyes. Why should we trust you now? Because I finally understand the cost of waiting until it is personal, Edward said. Then he turned to Brielle and slid the deed papers back to her. Sign them or tear them up. Your choice. But if you accept, this cafe becomes the headquarters of the fight for Maple Street. Cameras. Lawyers. Community meetings. Long nights. No guarantee of winning. Brielle looked around the room. Mrs. Delgado clutching flowers like prayers. Nurses checking phones before another shift. Denise pretending not to cry. Jonah trying to look fearless for her sake. The cafe had always been small. Suddenly it felt like the center of something larger than money. She picked up the pen, then stopped. Outside, tires screeched. Every guard moved at once. Through the patched window, a city inspector's van pulled to the curb followed by 2 tow trucks and a man in a yellow vest carrying an orange notice board. One guard muttered under his breath. They are not waiting for midnight anymore. The inspector marched toward the entrance with paperwork in hand. Brielle tightened her grip on the pen. Edward's eyes hardened. Helena had made her next move. And this time, she brought the government with her. The city inspector did not knock. He pushed through the door carrying a clipboard, 2 officers behind him, and the confidence of a man who expected rooms to shrink when he entered. Morning, folks. Building Safety Division. Immediate compliance review. He taped a bright orange notice to the patched front window before anyone finished reading the title. Temporary closure pending hazard assessment. The words landed like winter. Denise nearly dropped a tray of muffins. You cannot shut us down in the middle of breakfast, she said. We are full. The inspector did not look at her. Ma'am, I do not debate paperwork. I enforce it. He began walking the room, pointing with his pen. Damaged glass. Electrical concern. Exterior signage issue. Occupancy documentation incomplete. Each phrase sounded prepared before he arrived. Brielle knew scripted cruelty when she heard it. It wears official shoes and never raises its voice. Edward stepped forward. Name and badge number. The inspector finally noticed him and paused just long enough to recognize Money standing upright. Martin Hale, he said. Badge 4172. And this is a lawful action. Edward gave a small nod. Good. Lawful things leave records. Hale stiffened. One of the guards was already filming. Another was on the phone. Outside, neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the tow trucks and the universal smell of unfairness. Mrs. Delgado marched in carrying flowers like weapons. If they close this place, where do my morning customers go? A nurse still in scrubs spoke. Up from table 3. I have been buying coffee here for 2 years. The machine works fine. So does the wiring. A construction foreman near the register lifted his hard hat. I can tell you right now that wall is safer than my apartment. Murmurs rose into voices. Voices rose into a crowd. Martin Hale glanced toward the window and realized the room had changed. He was no longer shutting down a cafe. He was doing it in front of witnesses. Brielle stepped beside the counter, hands steady though her pulse was not. Sir, she said, if this is about safety, inspect everything. Fairly. If this is about pressure, just say that too. Hale smirked. Careful. Emotion does not override code. No, Brielle replied, but cameras make code behave. A laugh rippled through the room. Even one of the officers hid a smile. Edward looked almost proud. Hale cleared his throat and moved toward the back hallway. Fine. Kitchen inspection. He pushed through the swinging door. Denise whispered to Brielle, we passed inspection 3 weeks ago. I have the certificate framed by the freezer. Brielle followed with Edward and the guards close behind. The kitchen was spotless. Counters sanitized. Logs updated. Thermometers clipped exactly where required. Denise ran a tighter kitchen than some hospitals ran hallways. Hale opened the freezer, checked a gauge, then frowned at nothing. He was searching for failure and finding competence. Then he spotted the framed certificate on the wall. His jaw shifted. Brielle saw it before anyone else, surprise. This closure had expected a mess. Instead, it found proof. She lifted the frame and handed it to him. Valid through next quarter, she said. Signed by your department. Hale read the signature and went pale by inches. It was his own supervisor. One of the officers leaned over to see it and muttered, well, that complicates things. Outside, the crowd had doubled. Phones pressed to the glass. Maple Street was recording everything now. Hale straightened his tie and tried to recover authority. We may still need a secondary review. Edward stepped closer, voice low and lethal in its calm. Then call your supervisor here. In person. Right now. Silence. The kind that decides. Careers. Hale hesitated, then reached for his phone. Before he could dial, it rang in his hand. He looked at the screen and swallowed. Speaker or private? Edward asked. Hale answered on speaker. A woman's voice filled the kitchen. Martin, why am I watching you live on the news shutting down the wrong building? Martin Hale forgot where he was standing. That was the first sign he knew the game had turned. Men who feel protected usually keep their posture. Men who realize the shield is gone start blinking too much. The voice on speaker did not wait for an answer. Martin, respond. Why is Channel 8 broadcasting you from inside a fully certified business? Hale swallowed hard. There has been a developing concern, Director. No, the woman said, there has been a complaint from 3 council offices, 2 attorneys, and my own deputy asking why your badge is attached to a political stunt. Brielle watched the room change again. The same kitchen that had felt cornered now felt like a witness stand. One officer quietly stepped back from Hale as if distance itself could become innocence. Edward said nothing. Powerful silence can be louder than anger when it knows it has time. Director, Hale tried again, I was instructed to prioritize this address. By whom? She asked. He hesitated 1 second too long. Everyone heard it. Fear always arrives before truth. The answer came out smaller than he intended. An outside consultant. Name. Hale closed his eyes for a beat. Helena Cross. The officers exchanged a glance. Denise covered her mouth. Jonah whispered, "Wow." Brielle did not feel victory. She felt recognition. Some people use doors. Some use titles. Some use government forms stamped at the right hour. The director's voice sharpened. "You accepted operational direction from a private developer. Return to headquarters immediately. Your authority is suspended pending review." Speaker ended. The silence after accountability is different from ordinary silence. It has weight. Hale slowly removed the orange closure notice from his clipboard. He could not meet anyone's eyes. One of the officers took the notice from his hand and folded it in half. "We will see ourselves out, sir," he said, and this time the word "sir" sounded like a farewell. When they stepped into the front room, the crowd outside erupted. Not cheering exactly. Relief with volume. Neighbors clapped. Phones lifted higher. Mrs. Delgado rang the bell she normally used when flowers were delivered. The tow truck drivers quietly climbed back into their cabs and left without being asked. Maple Street had remembered something important. Bullies prefer private rooms. Brielle stood behind the counter, suddenly aware that her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. Denise rushed over and hugged her so fast they nearly knocked over the pastry display. "You did that," Denise said through tears. "No," Brielle answered, looking around the room. "We did." Edward finally stepped forward. He placed the unsigned deed papers in front of her one more time, but now there was no pressure in the gesture. Only invitation. "Miss Carter," he said, "I offered you a building this morning. That was too small." He nodded toward the windows, the street, the people packed shoulder to shoulder outside. "I would like to fund a community trust for this entire block. Rent protection for small businesses. Legal defense for tenants. Renovation grants. Scholarships. And I would like you to chair it." Brielle stared at him as if he had spoken another language. "Me? I pour coffee for a living." Edward smiled gently. "You stood between danger and a stranger before sunrise. Leadership is easier than espresso after that." Laughter rolled through the cafe, warm and surprised. Jonah wiped his eyes and pretended he was not. Denise shoved a pen into Brielle's hand. "Sign something before I faint." Brielle looked at the papers, then at the faces around her. People who had come in as customers now looked like neighbors. She signed slowly, carefully, like someone writing on the future itself. Applause thundered through the room. But Edward did not join it. He was staring at a television mounted above the counter. Every channel now carried the same breaking image, Helena Cross walking into a courthouse with a team of lawyers and a headline beneath her name. "Emergency injunction filed against Whitmore Capital. Hearing starts in 1 hour." The cafe fell silent again, but this time silence did not feel like fear. It felt like decision. On the television, Helena Cross climbed courthouse steps in a navy coat, cameras chasing every stride. Under the headline, experts argued in neat boxes about injunctions, asset control, and shareholder duty. Inside the cafe, real people worried about rent and lunch service. That is the difference between studios and sidewalks. One discusses consequences. The other lives them. Edward Whitmore reached for his jacket. "We need to leave now," he said. "If the court grants her order, she can freeze the trust before the first check clears." Brielle looked at the line still wrapped around the block, the neighbors crowding the windows, the half-finished coffees on tables that had become front-row seats to history. Then she did something nobody expected. She turned the sign on the door from open to closed, stepped onto a chair, and raised her voice. 10 minutes, everyone. Then we reopen. If they want to decide our future downtown, we are bringing Maple Street with us." For one heartbeat, the room only blinked. Then it exploded into motion. Denise started boxing pastries for the road. Jonah grabbed poster board from the supply closet and thick black markers from the office. Mrs. Delgado ran next door and returned with armfuls of flowers to hand out like banners. The nurses called friends. The foreman texted his entire crew. Even the guards, trained for order, could not stop smiling at the chaos of ordinary people becoming organized. 20 minutes later, a caravan rolled through the city. Black SUVs in front, pickup trucks behind, scooters weaving alongside, neighbors walking with handmade signs that read "Homes over greed and coffee builds community too." At the courthouse steps, reporters expected another corporate statement. Instead they got Maple Street. Cameras swung from Helena to Brielle as she climbed the stairs in her apron, cardboard dust still on her sleeve, flour near one elbow, hair tied back in the same rushed knot she wore every shift. Real life rarely arrives styled for television. Helena watched her approach with cool disbelief. "You brought a crowd," she said. Brielle shook her head. "No. I brought the people your paperwork forgot." Inside the courtroom, lawyers spoke in polished paragraphs. They cited clauses, leverage, fiduciary obligations, strategic necessity. Then the judge asked if anyone directly affected wished to be heard. Helena's team objected instantly. The judge overruled them. Brielle stepped forward with no legal pad, no degree on the wall behind her name, no practiced tone. She spoke about seniors who could walk to the pharmacy because the block still had one. About workers who could afford breakfast because the cafe kept prices human. About Jonah and tuition notices. About flower shops, laundromats, barbers, and lives too small to appear in presentations but large enough to matter. She did not perform. She told the truth. And truth, when spoken plainly, has a way of embarrassing strategy. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. When he returned, his ruling was brief. Temporary injunction denied. Community impact review ordered. No redevelopment actions permitted pending investigation into improper government influence. Gasps filled the room. Helena closed her folder with hands that finally looked human. Outside, Maple Street erupted so loudly pigeons lifted from 3 rooftops at once. By sunset, the cafe was open again. The broken window was still patched. The chairs were mismatched. The espresso machine still hissed like it had opinions. But now the block carried itself differently. Not richer. Stronger. Edward signed the trust papers at table 3. Denise framed the court order beside the menu. Jonah got an email confirming next semester was paid in full. And Brielle, still in her apron, poured coffee for the same neighbors who had become family in a single day. She had shielded one stranger in the rain and ended up protecting an entire street. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Power often looks unbeatable until ordinary people stand together. Kindness is never small when it inspires courage. I believe many communities lose not because they are weak, but because they think they are alone. What do you think matters more in the end, money or people willing to stand for one another? Disclaimer. The stories shared on this channel are fictional and created purely for entertainment purposes, as well as to convey lessons about human behavior and interactions, regardless of race, religion, or background, promoting a life of equality and compassion. Any resemblance to real events, people, or places is purely coincidental.